Welcome. Today's January 11th. No, thank you. Rewind. It's July 11th, 2025. And today is really the first day of our budget deliberations, a time for commissioners to visit about all the questions they had, priorities, and sort of strategies around funding the Douglas County budget for 2026. We're not taking any votes at today's meeting, and we won't take public comment. If you have public comment for us, we encourage you to either send an email or phone calls are great, but also we welcome public comment at our 5:30 business meeting, which will happen next Wednesday. Sarah, do you have anything before we get going here?
Commissioners, I kind of took our comments at the end of yesterday morning's meeting and kind of tried to organize them and to some thoughts as to how to approach our time, and met with Brooke and Jake as to how to do that. To us, we kind of felt like there were three bigger categories. There's sort of the market merit conversation, the Lawrence Douglas County Fire and Medical conversation, and then we prepared some information that puts together all of the requests that are eligible for the behavioral health sales tax. Commissioners, you have a sheet on that and we can throw it up on the screen. So we thought maybe that conversation could all come together. We've sort of sorted by what was one time and ongoing. So to us, those were the three things that we thought we would start with. So my recommendation would be to start with a conversation around market merit, and then LDCFM, and then, because I have a feeling the behavioral health items will take longer.
I like starting with the market merit conversation and LDCFM, and talking about that sort of right off the bat. Those are some big ones there. I think before we dive into the behavioral sales tax, I'd sort of like to talk with the commission about what we think our role is, especially around those requests that are for $2025. I think we have a couple of those that are in there around that, and what we think the county's role is in that. Would that be okay if we just add that before we go to behavioral sales tax? Because some of those are behavioral sales tax related, and some may not be so much so.
Sounds like a plan.
Is that okay with everybody? Just checking.
Great.
Okay. So Commissioner Dorsey, I think you had brought up merit and market and merit. It's listed in here. And also there's longevity. I don't know if you included that, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you'd like to talk about there.
Well, excuse me. My concern is, even though we currently have a flat mill levy, we're raising taxes 5.6% approximately on everybody over last year, because that's the value of the property increase on average. And my ongoing concern is we're taxing old people on Social Security out of their homes, or potentially could, and creating more homeless people. And we have more than enough now. We don't need any more. From what I read, the inflation estimates for 2026 are about 2.8 to 3%. And the market merit is far in excess of that. So I'm not sure I find it reasonable at this point.
I guess I would point out that we do not have a cost of living adjustment. That's not what our pay plan puts forward. We do market-based pay, which is based off of what the cost of the job is in the marketplace, and what that is going for, to sort of what folks could leave our organization and expect to make in another organization. I would point out that we've talked to area government employers about what pay rates that they're using. I will point out the city of Lawrence is planning on an 8% increase in 2026 for pay. Ours would be at 6.7 or 6.4. In Johnson County area cities, many of them are doing 6% as well, which is why I kind of targeted it at that.
I think Johnson County, I read in their budget is 4%.
Yeah, Lenexa and Overland Park, some of the other cities inside there, they're anywhere between 4 and 6.
What is our turnover rate here?
I could get that for you if you'd like. I don't have it off the top of my head.
It's green, but it's not registering.
Okay, let's try that instead. For context, when we did our pay analysis study against kind of other organizations in the region, we are below the city of Lawrence and always kind of expect to be below the city of Lawrence. They're just in a position they pay better than we do. And even with the correction that we made last year, we're not at that level. And they're, of course, really easy to leave, one government, go to another, and that's stationed in the same city. I think that we make up for that by being a fun and rewarding place to work. I think we've got fantastic, phenomenal staff, and I don't want to incentivize them to leave. And pay is really is not going to be the main incentive because we just aren't competitive overall with some of our Johnson County partners or even the city of Lawrence. And I think it's very valuable that we not have the money waste of turnover when we can manage it this way.
When we do that analysis, do we typically base it on other cities or other counties?
Both,
Okay.
just regional government employers.
Okay, so then do we take a look at like Shawnee, Wyandotte? Obviously, you just mentioned Johnson, but what other counties in our area do we actually base that on?
I could pull up the lists that we used for that. If you want me to. What I would also say is that, so the market-based data comes to us from a company called ESRI. They look at the Kansas City region and they're looking, okay, what do attorneys make? What kind of increases are equipment operators make? So there's hundreds of employers that are in that pool. And that's how we do market-based pay. If commissioners would rather, if there's concerns about how much we're doing, I would rather cut from the merit side and keep the market-based pay the way it is. So that piece is that piece. If you want to look at the 3% then that we allocated on top of that for merit, we can look at that. I know off the top of my head inside that group that I looked at from Johnson County, it was, Baser, Bonner, Unified Government, Shawnee, Overland Park, Lenexa, Merriam, Roland Park, Edgerton, Gardner, Olathe, all of those. It's Northeast Kansas cities and counties.
Okay,
is what
per
we looked
region.
at. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
That other study also included Riley and Leavenworth counties, I think.
So that was the McGrath study.
Yeah,
and that informed what we did last year. I did not, that was a separate kind of analysis that led to our adjustments last year. I'm not looking at that same group moving forward. Just because I can't get that data every year. We paid a consultant a lot of money to come in and do that analysis, and I don't want to do that every year.
So, Commissioner Dorsey, I think we're all trying to find that balance point between the tax burden that we put on our community members and also providing the services and the quality of services that we expect. So I hear you saying that. I'm interested in hearing from Sarah. We spent a lot of money on the McGrath study. We put significant dollars to bring pay up to level. If we were to reduce our adjustment to pay plan, we're now getting behind year after year. Can you talk about the impacts that would have on your office and possibly the impacts for the commission in future years if we have to play catch up?
Yeah, I think it would just mean that we do something like the McGrath study more frequently, and commissioners allocated $3 million to that. So the question is, if we don't keep up, then eventually you're going to pay that cost when we do another market adjustment. And though the rationale, I mean, the reason why we recommended doing the McGrath study is because I had department heads coming to me telling me they couldn't hire dispatch, public works. I mean, and the sheriff's office was so, they led that charge that first year because, he had 22 unfilled positions that he couldn't fill. So he came to the commissioners in sort of an emergency situation and said, I've got to do something on pay, or I'm never going to. And then, as you heard from Under Sheriff Simmons, it worked. They've been able to retain and stay competitive against their peers. And then that led to us looking at the rest of the organization.
Can I just have you offer a clarification? Because the words made it sound like we paid McGrath $3 million to do
No,
a
no, no.
study.
We
That was
set
our
aside
top amount.
Yeah, we set aside $3 million for employee compensation. Yeah, McGrath is the consultant. I think we paid them about $50,000 for that analysis.
That a little better. I saw Jean's
Yeah,
face.
sorry. No, but $3 million was what it cost us to implement the results of their pay plan, which was a big lift.
Yeah.
Can I come at this from a different angle then? Since there appears to be concern about the employees, let's talk about elected salaries. Under state statutory requirements, we're supposed to approve elected salaries for the entire county, which include the district attorney, ourselves, the sheriff, whoever else is on that list. I would recommend for electeds, we limit their increase to 3% and freeze the county commission at current level. That would save a little bit of money.
I hadn't thought about that. I mean, what data did you use to get to that recommendation?
Well, the 3% would be a little bit more than inflation rate for 2026. And I view this as a public service job, not a real job, if you will. And while it takes a lot of time, I don't think it needs a 6% increase year after year. And if you compound that out 5 years, you're talking much larger numbers.
So a little bit separate from the conversation of what we do percentage wise, I just want to make the comment that I suspect your career has been more lucrative than mine, and this is a real job to me.
Didn't mean it wasn't a real job. I just meant you're probably doing it as a public service, unless you view this as a career.
I view it as both. I do this for public service and as a career. It's not an either or situation.
That's personally how I feel about it too. I think, I think there's a lot to unpack there, Commissioner Dorsey. The approach with elected salaries, period, was the market and merit raise, as well as the compensation and compression study that we allocated for was meant to be organization wide, and that to parse out electeds salaries, and we have a lot of electeds at the county. It's all 5 commissioners and 5 other elected positions, which I won't rattle off, but so there's 10 elected positions, and all with varying degrees of comparables that you could pull from, that are going to vary widely. I think usually dependent on different forms of government that local governments choose. And so to me, it doesn't make sense to parse us out. I also can't really see that it would be a significant enough savings that anyone anywhere would feel, frankly. In my opinion, that's true, even if we were to look at, which I don't support this, but if I go down the road of looking at really pushing down our market merit allocations that Sarah has included in the budget this year, that one, I do think that'll put us in a situation of having to catch up more in the future. And we'll have recruitment and retention issues. And two, I don't think that it would impact the overall budget enough that property owners who are paying taxes would feel it. I mean, I just don't think that that maths out. So it's not a compelling argument to me from that perspective. And I also, I just don't support the idea that electeds should be sort of treated or viewed differently in terms of salary and benefits for what is absolutely a real job. And if we start to decrease the value of that, it really impacts who those positions are accessible to. And so I have a fundamental issue with that, but I just on a math level and financial level, I don't think that it makes an impact.
Commissioner Dorsey, I want to understand what you said. So you're saying that those electeds, and you lump them into all one group, that includes the sheriff, the DA, the register of deeds, the treasurer, and the county clerk. All those positions aren't full-time job. I think they are full-time jobs. Yeah. So would you include that in there doing a service and not it's a job?
No, I view the other electeds as full-time jobs.
So would you be applying that logic to all electeds or to just these 5?
No, all.
Okay. I'm just trying, I mean, if I was the DA in a full-time elected position and looked at comparative salaries to DAs across the state of Kansas, right? We need to make sure that the person who's taking that position has a market rate pay for what they do. I think especially in the DAs, those lawyers can make a lot more money in private practice than they could, right? So I get a little nervous about adjusting that pay rate to the quality of district attorneys that we would be getting and their expertise in that position. If it becomes much more lucrative to do that work outside of the district attorney's office, then the quality we'll get prosecuting cases in Douglas County will take a hit. But I just want to make sure I'm clear. You think that part of their work is service?
Well, you just said they can all make more money in private practice. So wouldn't you agree that there is some component of service to the community in their running for
already?
office?
Yes, yeah. I agree with you already. And lowering it more, I think, is a concern for me. I also, I mean, we can pull up the McGrath study, but I think my research, and it's not exact, on county commission pay, when you compare it to Wyandotte County, you know, the big 5 counties and the amount of people that you represent, I think this group is paid at a much lower rate. I think what you're seeing in Johnson County is well over $100,000 per commissioner. In Sedgwick County, it's extremely high. I could be wrong on that, and I'll open it up to Sarah, who might have more technical information.
I'd have to pull up the exact amounts because it does change every year, but I do know that the Johnson County commissioners are paid significantly more than what you're all paid.
I think there was something in the paper about Wyandotte recently where they were trying to increase their salaries by 50 or 60%, and that didn't go over too well.
I do want to point out that for the treasurer, clerk, and register of deeds, and the sheriff and the district attorney, you know, we do look at them in commensurate to high-level executive positions in their fields of service, and they are not out of line. What we pay the clerk, the treasurer, and the register of deeds is in alignment with our other department heads. So, and this is their full-time job. They gave up a career elsewhere in the private sector to come here. I don't feel like that is, they should be volunteering or donating their time. Also, it's important to note that those positions do not get vacation and sick leave. So as when they leave this organization, they don't get any sort of vacation payout that like Brooke will get when she leaves. So they're already at a disadvantage, plus they have to pay filing fees to run for their job. So I feel that those 5 positions are very different than county commissioners. They're full-time, they supervise staff, they gave up a private sector career to come here, run for a job, and they're not paid out of line with what their appointed peers would make. In fact, I think the sheriff makes less than the police chief. So
Well, I just got that McGrath study last night, so I haven't had a chance to look
And
through
it really wasn't focused on elected official pay, because we didn't do that. So you can look at it, but it wasn't really focused on elected official pay.
I think about this occasionally. We could all go mow grass and make more money and probably never have a death threat. Of course, this is a public service. That doesn't mean that we should be subject to being devalued separate from the rest of the county organization. Do we have a second commissioner that's interested in cutting here?
I'm interested in this is a very unusual year with all the cuts that we've had. And so I think I'm interested in understanding what some of the other counties they're currently in their budget season too. And so they're also dealing with some of these budget cuts. And so before we make a decision about what we're interested in doing, I'm interested in understanding what Wyandott's doing, Shawnee's doing, and Johnson County is currently doing, since they're like the closest to us. And so if we could maybe have Sarah or Jake take a look at those county commission salaries and maybe just report back to us for next week as we move into deliberations, just so that we have a better understanding of where they sit, what they're currently doing to better inform us so that we can just make a better understanding.
Are you just looking at county commissioner pay? And
That's all I'm looking at.
Okay.
That's all I'm really concerned with.
I'm struggling to understand why we would go further down this path when there's so much before us for budget deliberations, to be honest. And I don't, Commissioner Anderson, I hear you that perhaps other counties and their own budget processes are starting to grapple with budget cuts from the federal government is what I assume you're talking about, and that we are seeing that through some of our requests. As Sarah talked about yesterday, other than the HUD grant, we don't anticipate any significant direct hits. It's more going to be how it hits our community partners and the community at large, in particular with, loss of Medicaid, SNAP, those types of broad benefits. So I feel like I'm struggling to know how we would even really put it in current enough context to determine whether or not to adjust 5 salaries in an organization of 600 plus 550 FTEs is what I believe I heard earlier this week. That I'm struggling to understand why we would go further down that when we have so much else before us to determine in the context of this budget. So I guess that's just where I'm at. I'm not opposed to, if Sarah can pull up more of that information, and it's helpful to have in commissioners' inboxes to look at and might answer some of the questions, but I just have reservations about going further down this rabbit hole when it's been budgeted for, it maintains a flat, it's been budgeted for in a way that maintains a flat mill levy currently, that doesn't increase taxes, that it maintains the sort of progression of compensation for our organization-wide that I think is really necessary for our organization's health and success and the ability to benefit the community long term. And I also think it's important for us as one of the largest employers in Douglas County to lead by example. everyone and everywhere that has employees, whether they're private or public, should be trying to determine how to like raise boats over time. And, those employees are also taxpayers in this community, not 100% of them. Some of them don't live in this community, but they're also taxpayers. So there's implications there that I just think there's a lot to unpack about this. But if we're going to zero in on just 5 salaries, I'm sorry, that just doesn't make sense to me. I just want to share that.
I want to be
Feedback.
clear, we're talking about $16,000.
And I don't mind.
That's
us
all
having-
this is, $16,000.
I don't mind us having the context for that discussion of commissioner pay. I'm not sure that I want to tackle it necessarily with this budget, but I don't think it's out of line at all for us to kind of know what, how our peers are doing.
Sure, we could, and if we wanted to, we could get a more full conversation of where county commissioner pay is in other communities. I would love to not hold the budget up because of that. But if that's something you want to talk about this fall so that we could prepare for 2027, we could talk about where commissioner pay is. Because I'd like to throw in Sedgwick to that because they're another large county, and some of those other counties. Riley, I'd like to throw in some of those other comparable counties and also some bigger cities because although they actually work way less than you guys do, in my opinion, because they don't have as many meetings.
Thank you. And that was going to be my next question too. If we were looking at 5, what was that budget comparison, right? So
Yeah.
16,000. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This increase would be $16,000 for you all.
Okay. Thank you.
By the field.
One of the problems I think we have in using Johnson County as a comparison is the fact that they have a lot of industry and commercial, and their tax rate is 25 and not 41. So they have the benefit of a lot more dollars to play with.
Yes. And how does that change the job? How does that change the job?
It doesn't. They just have more money to use.
Yeah. I think you make a good argument for some economic development discussions.
Exactly.
Okay, I feel like we've asked staff for some data here. I'm not hearing commissioners wanting to spend more time here, but I want to check in. I feel like we have one commissioner, maybe. Nope, we're okay. We're okay. Just checking around the table. All right. Do you know what data we're asking for?
Yeah, and I'll do my best to try to get it to you before the end of our deliberations, but if not, we'll make a note to talk more about how we compare county commissioner pay in the fall.
Okay.
Just one other question. Did we reach a consensus on the overall market and merit percentages?
I heard, Commissioner Dorsey, I heard you start by saying that you thought the overall percentages, and then I heard you say you wanted to take a different tack at it, and that's when we went to electeds. So,
Well, I addressed those specifically, but overall, are we all in agreement on the 3 point, what was it, 9 or?
3.3.
It's a 3.7 market.
And
a
the 3 merit?
And a 3% merit pool. So that means not everyone's going to get the 3%.
I didn't hear any other commissioner express a desire to look at decreasing that, but since you raised the point again, if there's any other commissioner that feels compelled.
Especially with the investment we made last year to readjust salaries to get them to where they are market sound. I don't see the benefit in falling behind on those when that just means another catch up in the future. We were able to absorb this one without an increase in the levy. That won't happen again. So I think it's honoring to the staff we have to, the market rate. We have data to back that up. The merit pool. I just think we can't keep people here if we don't appreciate them.
What is the budget implications, the difference between the two?
But what would be the recommendation to move it from a 3% merit to a 2% merit? I'm not sure I'm clear as to what your recommendation would be.
I don't have a recommendation. I'm just asking everybody if they want to talk about it anymore.
Oh, okay. All right.
Go ahead, Commissioner Anderson.
No, I was asking if there is a difference between the merit, but there is no cost difference between the merit.
Between which merit?
The merit that we currently have budgeted
Yeah,
and the merit that Commissioner Dorsey is suggesting.
he's not giving me a suggestion.
Okay, right. Sorry.
I
No.
would encourage us not, I mean, we can go down every single line, but I think some choices will impact other choices. And I think I'm not sure we're ready to go line by line, and we're looking at some broader conversations. I think this conversation was really maybe part of the hearing that we just didn't get attached onto the hearing. What questions were there? Why are we at where we're at? I'm a little nervous. I think we should sort of continue to talk broadly about the budget. If there comes to a point where we think we need certain dollars for certain things, then we may look at market and merit.
Yeah, that's the only reason I thought it might be well to address it at the beginning, because if there were reductions there, there would be money for something else later.
Mhm.
And I want to just say, my priorities in putting this budget together were to preserve existing services and preserve existing staff. You have capacity under this budget to lower the mill levy if you want to, if you don't add new things. So I think that's part of the conversation here, is that's how I put this budget together, is how do I preserve the services we have under a flat mill levy, and have given you potential that if you want to lower it because you're concerned about its impact, you can do that. You just have to be cautious in what you add.
I think it's good to flag things for the things that maybe need to be talked about before a budget comes out. Like if there's a difference in philosophy that we want to entertain about staff salaries, I think that's something that could be talked about through the year and then inform Sarah's process before it comes to a recommended budget would be my thought.
That'd be really helpful for me too, that if I didn't know that this was an area of concern since I delivered the proposed budget, that there was any concern about market merit. So we would have highlighted it more in hearings if I had known that there was any concern about it.
Well, let's move on, commissioners, to something that we have heard some concern about, and that's LDCFM. We had a new, and thanks, Jake, for sending that to us. Sort of the blue-gray plan. For those of you listening in the public, the commission has seen some color-coded plans. And the recommended budget includes a gray plan. I think Jake's putting that up on the screen here. And then we also had a proposal that came from LDCFM for a blue plan. And the question came up during our hearings about what would happen if we would do a 40-hour expansion ambulance. Jake, do you want to walk us, or Sarah, do you want to walk us through that real quick?
Yeah, so commissioners, on the screen here, you have the blue-gray option, which is the gray option that is included in my proposed budget, which does its best to hold EMS harmless. That in and of itself shifts percentages from the city to the county. So we are picking up more expense than the governance agreement calls for. This would be on top of it. And you can kind of see there's a bright blue line on the table there yep, there, Jake's got it. And that is the addition. So it does have a city impact in theory there. So the city impact is 210. So Commissioner Willie, we were talking about that. So this does show that the city would pick up a portion of that if we did this, I assume, but it still is an overall reduction enough because we pick up more on the shared expense percentage that it offsets and they meet their city cut. So there's so many levers here in this or in this agreement as to how we fund things. So this does, I think this answers some of the questions you had. They would pay their portion, their new adjusted proportion for 2026 of 60.96 of the 40-hour expansion ambulance, but the shift is enough that the county picks up an additional $842,000 a year by that shift of about 3% of their total budget. I would say, commissioners, and I know I had some conversations yesterday with LDCFM and city manager. Things are very much still in flux related to what the city is planning to do. Tuesday, they have their public discussion about where they want to set their revenue neutral rate, what their maximum mill levy would be for their proposed budget. And so that's where they will have a conversation of what's the maximum mill levy they want to entertain so that they can tell the county clerk and the county clerk can send out letters. But then they will continue to work on their budget till September. We will be long done by then. So I do think that there's many different varieties of scenarios that could happen. They have this $1.5 million reduction that they've been told they have to hit. And they're also talking about station expansion. That would begin to have operating impacts in 2027. But on their end, because they would issue debt to build the fire stations, the capital is a pretty big deal. So, and that is included in their 2026 CIP, which is, about, I think it was like $3 million to begin to issue debt to build that, to buy land, which will be expensive, and then to begin to build a fire station. So where that commitment on our end is cash and sits in our CIP, for them, it's real money to sort of commit to that. I guess I want to tell commissioners that as much as we might want to try to do in this space, I don't think this is, whatever you decide next Wednesday is going to be the last we talk about what happens on LDCFM in 2026.
So we've used the tool at times in the past, and maybe this is appropriate time, and maybe it's not, where we've made a decision but had some contingencies that had to be fulfilled first, and we've set that money aside, and to show that that partner can kind of come to the table in the way that we need them to. Is that not a tool that you see being able to be deployed here? Is that when you say like we can't touch it again? We need to. We couldn't.
No, I think we
find more
could.
dollars after the fact, but we could put some strings if need be, right?
Yeah, I think we could. And I think it could be related to, some sort of funding. Because what I would say, if they were to, they could just say, sure, we're going to make our cut. And the city will spend $1.5 million less. The county is going to spend $528,000 more. But if they decide to restore a cut, I don't know what that means for us, because I almost have to go back to I have to go back before the gray option, because that gray option was reflective of us absorbing more expense. So this, from 18 FTE reduction to a 10 FTE reduction. So I am really not sure what that means for us. If they said, we don't want to cut 1.5 from LDCFM. So I get that. More what I'm saying is if you want to put more in here, I think we should not commit necessarily to what we're saying we're going to do, because I don't know what that would look like. And I even think my base proposed budget could look different. If they decide to restore part of a cut, I have to go back to 3664. I really don't know what that looks like. And this is really actually what I was afraid of as we were entering this process, is that, because we try to get our budget done before the R&R rate, it just makes it difficult.
As we,
I mean, I think this is part of the challenge and where I feel like the city unilaterally on a partnership agreement made a choice to cut budget. I get nervous about the county. I mean, I want to make sure we maintain EMS levels, so I'm supportive of the recommendation, but I get nervous when we start making unilateral decisions about EMS service that we're getting further and further apart from a partnership agreement. What I see in this one is that we are essentially, if we decide to go with this plan, would be telling the city they need to pay $210,000, right? I think that's what I'm frustrated with in the LDCFM behavior to date, is this sort of unilaterally making these decisions. And I don't want to continue to contribute to that separation. I agree very much with some of the things we heard in the hearing. Like, I'd like there not to be isolated activities that are county funded versus, because it infects you heard Chief Darling say, mobile integrated health response impacts the entire department, and yet the county is paying for it entirely. As we look to a new agreement, I'd just like to say it is still this percentage, whatever the percentage is, and let's fund the percentage. But I feel like if we start to do this, we're sort of adopting some behaviors that have frustrated me from others.
This one's such a weird budget because, we instruct Sarah to give us a, status quo budget. And there were two competing status quos in here that reacted to the proposed cut from the city. Either we stay with the same percentage, which is also then a decrease in funding on our part for LDCFM, and a decrease in services that we find to be critical and that we've invested in. Or the other status quo, which is only still part of the equation, is to maintain that EMS service, which means we're now out of balance with the percentages with the city while we're working on a governance agreement. And that's a very uncomfortable place for us to be. So acknowledging actually both of those things are really uncomfortable. And so Sarah had to choose between those two. And I think this was kind of where our discussion so far kind of led, was the gray option, which was to maintain our ambulance service. I think that's really important. So we're already kind of in that weird spot. And we've said, and we've heard Sarah say it, and we've said, like, it's that change in percentage just has to be thought of as a 1-year scenario. And then we need to get back on track. What that looks like with the city, that's the part I don't quite know and can't quite envision. I'm assuming as we do, as if they follow through a station expansion, that's the opportunity to kind of rebalance things. So that's, the gray option is certainly on the table. I wanted to look at this as a thought exercise because the next level up, the blue option that we were given, was for adding a 24/7 ambulance, which with Station 6 expansion is something that we are likely to do. And in that case, it would be following the partner as opposed to leading the partner. I also recognize that that's a big leap for us that we wouldn't be making financially this year, we'd be making it next year. And this 40-hour-a-week ambulance is the in-between to ramp up to that, as opposed to going in with a big possibly tax increase for next year to cover that Station 6 expansion. This felt like a middle way worth talking about. But I recognize that we either have to say that we're on our own and eating the city's portion of it, and that means we're changing the percentages even more, or we're turning back to the city and saying, can you come up with 200,000 so that your cut is 1.3 instead of 1.5? And that doesn't seem like something I want to dismiss. I think it's worth talking about.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Willie, and I think I'm in a similar headspace about it. Though for me, I'm personally more interested in the blue option, in part because I think that, we have a lot of data over the years that, another ambulance has been needed, and we know it's a part of the Station 6 expansion. The implication is significant for us in that difference. But if we talk about, the city's implication between the blue, gray and the blue option, it's less than $40,000 difference if I'm reading that right. The city impact, 1.5, it's still in the 1.5 million range. And so, but it's a bigger implication for us. I think that, I hear your concerns, Commissioner Kelly, about the sort of taking a similar approach maybe that we have exhibited, that we've expressed some frustration with over the years. But to a point, it feels like, well, in this year, it was a little different. We did get to sort of a progression in the process and an acknowledgement from early on that there were some particularities about this year, the fact that we are extending the governance agreement, knowing that there's a lot to reassess and reevaluate about that. Just all of those things put us in this is a little bit of an odd year out. The city has made a much bigger directive this year about those cuts. And I don't believe that we were necessarily involved in that from the beginning, but I do believe that we have been graceful in response to that, and that us choosing to lead with adding service that I think that there's plenty of evidence to suggest that we need, planning now for station expansion that for all intents and purposes we believe is on the horizon, and know definitively that that's in the city's plan, even if the operating dollars haven't been explicitly talked about there yet, but that we can lead by example in some ways in that. And also I think that financially we can absorb it easier now and potentially avoid any mill levy increase in the future. And that part of it interests me very much. And while it is, it's a more significant jump up to a 24-hour ambulance than the 40-hour a week for us, as far as I'm reading in the budget, we have space for that. And it does shift the percentages significantly. And it doesn't guarantee us that the city will commit to those operating dollars, but I guess I choose to believe that it might prompt them. And then I also acknowledge that there are all the unknowns that Sarah described, and that in a few weeks, couple months' time, we could be back at a bit of a square one conversation with, are we just back to that original percentage and there's no longer a cut on the table, and this was all a long thought exercise that spanned 2 seasons.
Sarah, could you review legally what we have to do and when regarding the budget? On the 20th, you've got to do something, right?
So before the 20th, we have to notify the county clerk what the maximum mill levy we want to consider for the 2026 budget. That's all we have to do.
Oh, I thought it was just a revenue neutral statement that you were going to exceed revenue.
No, you got to tell them the levy.
Exact. Okay.
And that you can go below, but you can't go above.
Okay.
So we have to set a maximum levy before the 20th. And then by August, okay, so yeah, between August 20th and September 20th, we have to hold that hearing. And then between August 20th and October, we have it all the way to October 1st now to formally adopt a budget. So I think the city is on target to adopt their budget in September. But by next Tuesday, they're going to set their maximum mill levy and notify the county clerk, who will put it on a little notice along with the date of their hearing and send it out to every Lawrence resident. And that's what would be for us too. Now with us, the advantage is if we are done, we're done. Like, we know what our levy is. They're just sort of guessing at what their ceiling is, and then they can fall below it. Yeah, I thought it was just like, we're going to go above, and no, we have to tell them a levy. Well, it makes it difficult. I would say here, commissioners, that like when I look at this is the gray option on the screen. man, like the city's cut is 1.5. Their estimated operating impact for Station 6 is $4.7 million. It is a 3 mil increase for them to do Station 6. So in addition, you know, they have to dig out of this hole and then they got to add 3 million on top of it in theory to get to Station 6.
So Commissioner Reed, I am aligned with you at the blue as well. And so I do think it is much needed after hearing all of the evidence. I think it's the direction that we do need to go. Commissioner Kelly, I understand when it comes to setting a precedent and working with the city. Absolutely. I think we have a lot of work to do in working with the city and coming together and collaborating. But at the same time, when we think about physical and mental well-being, whether it be for our residents and or for the membership that's actually serving our residents, I think we have to ensure that we're actually showing up for them and building a system that actually supports the population that we serve, but also supports those that are actually serving everyone. And not allowing those that are cutting the budget to set that precedent for us and us as leaders ensuring that we're making the right decision for everyone that we're serving. And so I do think that the blue option is really the right choice in this situation. And yes, it is raising our levels. And hopefully it's only raising it for 1 year as we come together and really figure out what that next framework really looks like across the county.
I suppose one thing that's probably valid for us to try and unpack and understand is if the city decided in the imminent years that Station 6 was no longer part of their capital improvement plan, that operating dollars and a mill levy increase was not really on the table for them, then wouldn't that mean that we're sort of in the status quo of where we are now with adding an ambulance that can be placed at one of our existing stations, and that the staffing and the operational dollars that would be implicated this year and continued would then be the status quo without a new station, which would add.
Yes, I guess, Mike, I just want us to be very, if this were to move forward from the county's perspective to increase funding for an additional ambulance, I would like it to say that if, you know, it's associated with Station 6. So in some ways, like, because what I don't want is to say, oh, well, we're just adding another one. And then 3 years down the road, oh, now we want another one on top of that for Station 6, you know? So at a certain point, we have to get back to standards of cover and we have to get back to what our coverage is for the community. And so I hear what you're saying. I just think we're in a time of flux here until we really get, until they commit to operations for Station 6 and we know what our coverage rate is community-wide. Because I would say, you know, this percent of 60-40, they're going to be hard pressed to go back down to 64-36. So that's what I worry about. You know, it's a huge financial jump for them. You know, so I mean, at a certain point, that's what comes into this. It is a huge impact for the city.
I think I have the same concerns Patrick does.
And I think we all share those concerns. I think that's what makes this tricky. If we were really just talking about, does our community need more ambulance service? I think we'd say, yes, I think the data supports that. The real question is, how do we work together as partners to get there and when? And that's, I think, the difficulty. I just crunching, I mean, just looking at numbers that we've talked about, the difference between, and I haven't looked at the difference between like the blue option and other options, but the the difference between the blue-gray option and the gray option, which would be the 40-hour-a-week ambulance, is, it's that $346,000 to the county budget. Is it possible, or is it something we want to entertain, that we would set aside that money to, as a, that if LDCFM, maintains their direction towards Station 6, maintains kind of what they've given us as the framework to work from, then we would execute that, and add that additional 40-hour-a-week ambulance. And if they did not, then that money gets banked for Station 6 in the future, or ambulance expansion in the future, and we just maintain the status quo with the ambulance service that we have.
Commissioner Willie, I just want to affirm what you said. Like, I think there's the need there, right? And I am not a fan of throwing the Miller levy up and down, and would like to have some more consistency. One of the things I worry about is with the expansion of Station 6, which I think should happen, it is increasing that, I mean, we're saying today we may need a mill levy increase. We actually don't know that, right? I mean, it might work within our budget with other choices that we make, but I want to prevent against it. I mean, I don't like being the commissioner who was here when we changed the agreement. That was a significant up in mill levy when we changed the agreement to the current 3664. And I think that was hard for our community to sustain. And if we are committed to putting another ambulance in Station 6, and it sounds like we are, I am curious if there are ways that we can maybe, and this is really dangerous space that I'm in here right now, because I'm brainstorming. Maybe we look at some of these one-time costs that we have and make it mill levy, so that we know that mill levy is there in the future. Yeah, I'm going to watch Sarah just roll her eyes at me. But I want to make sure we have the mill levy to sustain Station 6 for expansion. But I'm also sort of worried about, I'm going to stay with how we work with the city. It's in someone to lead by example. I hear that, like, we're going to fund at a certain level, and others may be feeling more like, well, what type of precedent are we going to set? I don't know if that helped anything at all, but I do think we're going to need this ambulance in the future for sure. Let me amend that. I think we need the ambulance now. But I don't want to set a precedent that the county will continue to just ignore the percentages that we've agreed to. Why do we have an agreement if we're just not going to follow it?
And that agreement ends at the end of 25.
We're in a 1-year extension. It actually ended last year at the end of 24, and we were in a 1-year extension. And there's so many factors in that space. Like when I met with Chief Hardy and the city management team, they are 2 years away from a new accreditation process, which requires that new standard of cover document and a new strategic plan. And from what I understand, and someone told me this, that there's a new nationwide data tracking system that's going to be implemented that will greatly enhance the amount of data that they collect. And so, but that won't get implemented till like 3 years from now. So, I mean, this is a field that's constantly in flux in terms of its data and how it's going to come together. So one of the things we had thought about just as staff was, well, maybe we just, acknowledge what happens in the 2026 budget, punt it down another year, and then figure out if the city in 2027 commits to station expansion, use that strategic plan and accreditation document to build the standards of cover. But then we're talking almost 2030 before we have a new stable agreement, and that's a long time in terms of budgets and how we work.
I was just going to say that if we move in this direction, I wanted to acknowledge what you said the other day about training and education, around the continuing education credits, just to ensure that we find a way to include that in this if we do move in the direction of this higher cost. Because I think it's really important to ensure that we hold them to that, ensuring that that everyone is trained appropriately and they have the correct training and certifications. Because I did notice that the maintaining the training lieutenant is not included in this. Oh, it would move back in?
Yeah, I think it would be. I think this is an older document from when,
Okay.
when they were still, I mean, so much of this has been in flux.
Okay. All right. Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
So,
I've read that both ways for a long time.
Yeah.
okay. All right. So it would be included.
Yeah. I had Commissioner Kelly, with your thought about using one-time dollars and holding levy for station expansion. I guess I'm curious as to how Commissioner Dorsey would feel about that. Because I think we could find a way to do that if that was something the commission was interested in doing.
I can say I don't like it.
Okay.
It may
Get
be a
in
bad
before-
idea.
Okay.
I'm just trying to.
But if it is that you
Yeah.
want to reserve some of it, but not necessarily, we could find a way to make that work if you wanted to.
Had thought through some of that and felt pretty uncomfortable with holding it in a way that didn't meet the need that we've acknowledged that we have. So not mine.
Not sure it's as I articulated. I'm not sure I
Sure.
loved it. So, Sarah, some data that I'd like to have is if the city, I think we have to hold the potential that the city may, they may raise the mill levy to address a cut. When we renegotiated the agreement, we raised the mill levy, so to avoid a cut, right? If they do that, I would be interested in what the new with the old percentages, what that would be, and what our cost would be to plan for that second ambulance, for that additional ambulance for Station 6. Like how do those numbers, because that may be dollars that we want to put aside in this budget with it adjusted, that even if they, I'd just like to know what that numbers are, because while I agree that we have maybe we have some room to do this, I'm also interested, and that means what else we would choose not to do, the implications of that, because this is a big number, and I want to make sure that commissioners are. To me, when I'm looking at budget, the item that's on the table always feels good until I compare the others that are still in the book, and then it's a hard priority decision.
I think I can get some of that, probably not until like Wednesday, because I know the city is really pushing hard to get ready for that meeting for them on Tuesday. So I can try to get something Tuesday or Wednesday, but in terms of if they were to restore the cut or part of their cut, what its impact would be on the county. Because it changed, like I said, it takes all the options and wipes them. But what I would say is that, 1.5 for the city is, it's a mill. It's actually a little over a mill. I think their mills are 1.2 or 1.3. So it would have to be 100% dedicated to fire, and I don't know that they'll do that.
And just because if they raise mill levy, they have a lot of other cuts on their table,
Yeah.
not just this one. So there's no guarantee that this is where they would choose to change that.
Right. And then every time they take on more, that whole part of that 842,000, or that, if the shared percentage, because I did say that when I had conversations with the city, is if you guys begin to look at this, the percentages go back to 3664. Because my assumption is if they restored their part of the cut and kept the percentages here, you all would not be pleased.
I don't know. Commissioner Dorsey, were you going next, or I can't see your light, so I can't tell. All right. I just want to speak from my perspective. Like, this is my third budget cycle, and the one that has felt the healthiest in terms of conversations with LDCFM and even that part with the city, even though what they're proposing is a big cut, and we've got a lot of implications that come from that and a lot of reactions that we need to make with it. But every other year, we've just been blindsided. I think we are legitimately part of the conversation and a more valued partner than I felt like we have been for the last couple of years. So I find that to be a positive. So that doesn't mean that things might not absolutely get the rug pulled out from under us again, because we have the last couple of years. But I think we, in terms of leading the way too, maybe we have to kind of lean into our part of the LDCFM conversation, because I think we're expecting and wanting to get a higher say, a larger amount of say, and this may be how that conversation starts too.
Okay, so I'm hearing that we'll try to get an impact of what, if the city were to restore some of its cut, what its impact would be on us. But I'm not hearing.
Send staff down that if others aren't interested in looking at that.
I'm always interested.
I would be interested.
No, it's a lot of work too.
But I'm not going to change anything else. The gray option stays in the proposed budget.
I mean, that's what I assumed anyway, was that's the proposed budget, right? The proposed budget is what it is. And each of us five in our worksheets get to decide if we think that we should allocate more dollars to that line. And we all might have different numbers when we come together on Monday morning. And also with this particular line, know that there's all these other moving parts that mean we might be rediscussing that particular number before we, have the final budget hearing in a couple of months. That just might be where we're at. But I think right now, for this exercise of getting through deliberations, each of us just have to determine what number, if any, we think is worth allocating there. And then we'll see where that averages out.
What is the city doing on Tuesday night? They're just reviewing, they're not voting on anything.
Well, no, they'll vote on their maximum mill levy.
Oh, okay. So they will have a firm proposal for,
No, so there's a difference, because how you're doing it, there's a firm proposal. They're just sort of setting their ceiling. Everything under the ceiling is still very fungible in their world. That we chose not to do it that way. We chose to do it this way, which is to be very solid and get it all finalized before. So all they're doing is talking about what the maximum potential mill levy they would entertain for 2026.
So
But they got to vote on that, and they got to have a precise number.
we'll still be reading the tea leaves on Lawrence City budget for a while, but we should have more leaves to read from after Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly.
So our purpose for today isn't to come to a consensus on an option here. It's just to kind of weigh out and hear from all of each other. And then as we go back to our own worksheets, we see how things balance. So if there's room, we might do one of these others. If there's not, we may go back. So that's what we're up to. Okay, thanks.
And I think I have direction that I need for you all for additional information as I get it. So I'm ready to move on.
Can I recap just before it's quick? So what's it written into the budget now, the gray option, is an additional expense on our behalf of 183,000. The blue-gray option would be an addition to our of 528,000, and the blue option would be 1.16 million.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And those last two numbers that Commissioner Willie read are inclusive of the 183, right? Okay.
Yeah. So if you're working on your spreadsheets, you'd want to subtract out that amount that I have in the base. If you don't get that, we'll figure that piece out. But yeah, and you can find those numbers in the blue-gray you just got today. And then, but the blue option is included under your LDCFM tab in the budget.
So the addition,
We could maybe, Brooke, could we add those numbers to the comment section of the commissioner's worksheet? Yeah, we'll give you the deltas, for the delta for blue-gray and the delta for blue. And we'll add it in the comments side. So I'll make your math a little easier.
and we do have those though, but it's 346,000 additional for
Yep.
blue-gray, and it's about $1 million for the blue.
Yep.
and the blue-gray is the 40-hour.
Yep.
And the blue is the 24/7.
Yep. All the way, part of the way.
Mhm.
That's what I'd say. Okay. Are we ready to move on?
You want to do mental health sales tax? You said you had some stuff to show us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jake, you want to throw it up in front of you? And Jake's going to put it on the screen. We took your budget options sheet and we sorted out just the things that are eligible for the behavioral health sales tax.
You said you gave us this. This
Yeah,
is
it's
okay.
this kind of
Oh, this one.
colored thing
This thing.
here.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I see, Jake. He's gonna, so in front of you, we kind of cut off a couple of the, columns because you didn't need the mill levy column because this is all in the behavioral, in theory, although you could always pay for this out of the general fund. We just wanted to try to get it down to kind of one sheet, but it's still two sheets. If it's blue, it is a one-time project. If it's a yellow, it's a one-time project, but it was funded. So, and as you go to the back, and I took special alcohol and opioid off the list because they just complicate things. So this is, if it's white, it's ongoing. So you see here the totals. The ongoing amount eligible from the behavioral health sales tax fund of this list is 2.9 million. The one time that would be eligible is 3.3. And Bob, at some point in time, you may want to grab a microphone and a chair and come up and join us. We can give him this microphone and Brooke and I can share.
And the capacity within that
Yeah.
ongoing.
So the capacity from my best estimate right now, and it is a little bit in somewhat in flux, the unused, undedicated capacity in the behavioral health fund for ongoing projects is around 1.6 million. So you've got 1.6 available that is not already earmarked for an existing agency or an existing service, and you've got 2.9 being called for it, if that makes sense. We did mark in blue here, as you can see, some of the one-time things like headquarters. Those are, and I don't know, I am concerned that the 2025, if you funded that 2025 local crisis line, we're gonna have to be very solid to say they're not going to expect funding in 2020. I mean, they haven't asked for it in 2026, but in essence, you're paying them, you're paying them for back things, which is what you were kind of talking about.
And they have asked, they have a 2026 supplemental request for 350
Is
in their narrative. It's two requests for 350 and one for 175. So
That
the
was
total
my
total of 875.
So, but that's the hard part, is they didn't fill out the paperwork, Bob. So that's my concern, is they just said it in the narrative, but then they didn't fill out the paperwork. So I did not consider them having a 2026 request, because like you fill out two sets of paperwork, you should know you got to fill out the third set of paperwork. But I mean,
I'll just say that's how I interpreted it too, Sarah. I sort of double backed in the narrative and was like, well, are they asking for 2026 funds? But it's not a separate form. So I read it as just the retroactive requests and therefore unique to all the rest of these. Did you say, I have the 1.6 million capacity for ongoing. Did you say the capital? And I just missed it. So,
the capital is like 12 million.
okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
is
I
plenty.
know
of
there's plenty of
capacity.
room. I just wanted to.
Right. Yeah, there's plenty of capacity. I'd want to redo that. So ideally, what my goal would be, if you guys are good with this at the end of the budget, is that you would set our fund balance target based off the amount of ongoing revenue coming into the fund, which is the mill levy, the static, flat mill levy support that comes into this fund around 4 million, and then the sales tax amount. And we would set a 25% fund balance based off that revenue. So I would leave that in the fund, and then anything in excess of that amount, we would move to CIP. Now, here's what is going to make you nervous. So I can't pay for local crisis past services out of CIP. So we would want to make those expenses, for both Burt Nash or headquarters. We'd want to do that now because it's not an eligible expense out of the capital improvement fund. Let me finish if I can. So if you, but if you don't, then I have to have an exemption of this fund from my mill levy targets. Because if you're going to pay for things that are not, if you want to keep more money in here to pay for other things, I need to exempt it from my 25% mill levy target because it's, in essence, operating funds are not designed to hold money like this. It's supposed to be targeted for, according to statute and our reserve policy for other things. So that's part of my concern is once you do move it to CIP, it is restricted to capital. I could pay for software. I could pay for, but I cannot pay for people. I cannot pay for, previous contractual obligations. I'd want to do that now. So we don't have to do that right now, but I'm going to need some help with exemption from that.
Talking about at the end of 26, right?
Yeah, well, or no, probably, I'd love to do it for 26, inside 26, but yeah. You could decide, like, we want to pay some of these one-time things, and then I could do it after that.
Biggest concern I have with moving it to capital is it seems to be contrary to the way the vote was taken for the 0.25 sales tax. It doesn't say it's for capital.
But yeah, it does, because it gave us debt authorization to
Yeah,
pay
for the
capital.
TRC project, not
The ballot language doesn't say
Ballot language does
anything
not
specific about the treatment and recovery center. We didn't call it that then, but it is about behavioral health projects and services.
it actually says mental health.
Mental health.
Right, but it was
But it was not
capital.
specific to one capital project. It was programs and services projects. So, I think that moving it to capital, and it's still a dedicated fund to mental health capital projects. It's just about likening it with all the other ways in which we do capital projects and capital infrastructure. But it'd still be its own sort of isolated fund within that fund, or a line within that fund, and protected in that way. And what you just brought up, Sarah, about things that we wouldn't be able to use that for in future, it doesn't raise any concerns for me because, well, I'm not under the impression that we have any past contractual obligations currently. I don't really see that being a thing that would be true in the future, that we would have past contractual obligations. And I wouldn't expect, even the capital dollars, if it were to still sit in the current behavioral health fund as it's structured, that wouldn't be an appropriate use or allocation if we did have that instance. And right now, the capital is not interpreted as money for positions and ongoing overhead program and service expenses. So
I agree, and I think it would help send a signal to our community partners that that money is only for capital. You can't ask us for, it is, if out of that fund, would not be appropriate.
Okay.
The actual wording says for the purpose of financing the costs of providing mental health services for the county. Well, mental health services includes things other than capital.
Oh, yeah, no one said it didn't include, it just wasn't limited to just the TRC, is what we're saying.
So we've had one fund for behavioral health projects that has, the sales tax in it, and also have been feeding that also from the mill levy. And we've been thinking of it in terms of this is our ongoing capacity, this is our fund balance, ongoing capacity for operations, and fund balance for one-time one-time things. Most of those one-time things, I think, will be what we think of as capital projects in terms of like brick and mortar, because those are higher dollar, moving the system forward kinds of things. But I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the full restriction of putting it in our CIP fund with some additional restrictions on it. And let us have to understand better like what those restrictions might be. Because when I think of the fund balance that's there specifically for behavioral health projects, I certainly don't want to think of that only as a brick and mortar thing. I think there are other, legitimate one-time costs that will move an organization forward for stability or other things that I would want to still be free to consider. I just think, I think if we go too far down the bricks and mortar thing only, I think we'll miss out on some opportunities.
I'm on the same page as you.
I'm fine with that. Just give me an exemption from my fund balance policy.
I would agree, because I think services can be quite broad when it comes to mental health. And I think there's lots of different opportunities for us to think outside of the box when it comes to different opportunities with partners and improving outcomes at the local level. So, I mean, I think of mobile integrated health when it comes to that, and or MRT. And to me, that doesn't represent a physical building, but to me, that represents going out into the community and having an impact. And that might be a person. So I don't want that to limit us.
Yeah. And that ongoing capacity of what the sales tax brings in and what our mill levy brings in, those would always be available for operational things, ongoing things. And a lot of programs we do pay for out of that fit there. Where it gets tricky is when folks are asking for one-time dollars to fill a gap in operations that will just be reoccurring again next year. And so I think that's the signal I think we're hoping to send to folks is that that's a really tricky ask. Like if we can't see why it helps in the long run, just helping people run badly for another year doesn't seem to be a good use of funds. So it's, but the operating capacity, absolutely. There's some great programs that we have funded and that I think we'll talk about funding out of that capacity. And that total capacity, Sarah, is how much roughly annually for the operating potential for behavioral health sales?
1.6.
Sorry, that's the gap that we have available. What's the total operating?
Oh.
About 11, I think.
Yeah, around 11 million.
11 million annually.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's behavioral health sales tax and the mill levy
And
that we
the levy.
put
Yeah.
towards it.
Everything in Fund 303.
Yeah, is something I don't disagree that we should think about how we might do a one-time funding of a project. So this is where my questions were around the New Horizons program. And I was sort of surprised for them to call that one-time funding because I think we just need to expand that fund. But I can see a place where it might not fall under capital and be a one-time ask. That said, we are already applying general fund dollars, and we could apply general fund dollars to those asks. It doesn't have to say in behavioral sales tax. It could just we could expand the amount of dollars we are taking from general fund. I know it couldn't be capital, but it could be general fund dollars we put to that one time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It could come out of the general fund. It could come out of the 25% fund balance that sits inside the behavioral health fund. That is also okay too. We had a lot of confusion earlier this year in the community when they saw the totality of what's in this fund and thought it was ongoing money that we could spend every year. And I'm trying to create some clarity and transparency. So I do think that even if we kept it all in here, we just need to be really transparent as to what is available for ongoing obligations. Because we had people going around the community saying, oh, they have $30 million every year that they're not spending. And that was not true.
Yeah.
it's not
Can
true.
I clarify my math just real quick before we move on with that? 11 million are coming into behavioral health projects every year, and
Correct.
9.4 of that is already allocated to ongoing projects.
Correct.
In our base budget. And so
Yep.
we have 1.6 that we can look at for new operating.
Yep, it's rough to that. Yeah. And I've done it. I'll, get it to you. It's, yeah.
And that
Because I
ballpark is
think it's actually
okay.
a little more than the 11 if you, yeah, but I hear what you're in the right ballpark.
Yeah, and just to say that like most of this already is flowing right out into the
Yep.
community and doing great work.
Yep.
People communicate that we're not doing that, and that's really frustrating because 9.4 million or whatever that ballpark is a huge investment in behavioral health every year, and more capacity to keep doing that. It's just that separation between what's operational and what's one time, and being really responsible over those one-time dollars so that we don't put ourselves in trouble or put partners in trouble.
I do want to make sure on this sheet before we go on, I'll probably have Jake edit it before we send it out to you. So the permanent supportive housing HUD grant, the ongoing amount is $390,292. That would be what you would need to spend ongoing into 2026, the top one. $390,292. So 390,292. And then the one time, which would be the 1 year gap funding for 25 would be 171,512. So Jake, if you could create 2 lines and then color blue the 25 gap, we'll modify that for when we send it out to you.
So Sarah, that one-time funding, it would be a type of example of
Gap funding. Yep.
gap funding that is not a capital fund, is
Yeah,
that right?
but I
Okay.
can't, I really shouldn't do out of CIP.
Right.
So I really shouldn't do that out of CIP.
I've got some questions for Bob. Are we moving forward?
Before that, could I just say one thing that comes to mind when I listen to the conversation, which is we haven't received those requests in that way. You haven't said no. You've said yes to most of the requests that have come over the last 5 years or 6 years since the sales tax has been on. I just think that's important.
What's the plan for 2026 for suicide? We're taking out headquarters.
We're not taking out headquarters. We
You're
have
just not
funded
giving
in the
money.
past. Headquarters has requested funding for suicide prevention work. In 1 or 2 of those years, that is involved beginning to implement zero suicide at a pretty high cost. I think it was $75,000. That was to bring the Suicide Academy on board. That was to coordinate and convene all of our partners in doing the work that came out of the Zero Suicide Academy. The county has sustained that funding with headquarters up until last year at $27,500. What we asked the commission to do when things changed at headquarters last year was to more fully support public health's desire to have a zero suicide coordinator position at public health. So last year, the cost of that could have been $85,000. This year, what the ask from public health is to sustain that at $43,000 on a path to ongoing $27,500. That is for the implementation of zero suicide. In addition to that, there's suicide prevention work that's done. Engage Douglas County does some of that work. Headquarters does some of that work. There are partners throughout the community that have other dollars from KDHE and from KDADS to do suicide prevention work and training. We are not funding headquarters at all at this point. So if headquarters is doing suicide prevention work, they're doing that with KDAD's dollars or KDHD dollars or other foundations or donation dollars at this point. So at this moment, we have no investment or financial support for headquarters at an agency for any of the work that they're doing, if that makes sense. But there's plenty of work going on, and the county is invested in supporting that work in multiple places. So the suicide work that's being done are things like standing up a suicide fatality review board. The ongoing work that's been done in understanding specifically what's happening in Douglas County in terms of suicide mortality trends and what have you. That's work the public health does. You don't fund that specifically. It's what the informatics team does as part of its role with public health. So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
If one objective we have is to lower the suicide mortality rate in Douglas County. That's happening. The trend is good. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle.
Can I just get a clarification on the 43,000? That's actually 27,000 ongoing and 16,000 one time?
It's 27.5 ongoing and 15.5 this year.
And Jake, can we have those split and color coded also? Is that helpful?
That's what I emailed back.
So which way is it?
It's 27.5 ongoing, and that's built in, and 15.5 in addition for 2026, sorry. But if you add those two numbers up, it's 43. So it's 43,000 in 2026. 27.5 is ongoing.
So the 27.5 is built in and the 15.5 would be an additional one-time request in front of us.
15.5? No, the 15.5 is one time this year. Total 43 this year. Okay.
I'm good.
So what's the budget request for?
15,000.
15,000,
15.5.
15.5, not 43.
Is
Commissioner Kelly,
headquarters, oh,
oh,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Okay, just on along that thread, is headquarters engaged with any of the zero suicide work?
Yes.
Okay, do they sit on a committee or a chip
They're
or?
invited to meetings. They participate in meetings. They do trainings.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Kelly, I had in my notes that we've started down the path of mental health sales tax, but you had made mention earlier wanting to talk about the sort of retroactive 2025 requests. We just learned that part of the public health request is some $2025 one time. So maybe that's a good lead in to talk about those all together as a group.
Yeah,
Is it possibly a chance for a break? Short one.
yeah. Do we want to take a break real quick? Maybe a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and hit that.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
great. 10:37, we'll be back. Okay. Let's pick up that thread that we just left on. Commissioner Reed, I heard you said we don't have a contractual obligation. Can you define what you mean by that a little more?
Well, I believe that the one-time requests that we have for gap funding from previous years, which are for from Bert Nash and headquarters, I don't believe that we have any service agreements or contracts that obligate us to those funds. So that was my response to the comment from Sarah earlier when we're thinking about what types of one-time requests we might get. To me, that's not, while it's an example of something that wouldn't make sense out of capital improvement, if we were to move the dollars there. I also just wanted to make the point that I don't believe that we have any contractual obligations to those retroactive requests.
And you probably say that because there are no contracts for those funds.
Correct.
Can I ask for a point of clarification that'll could either be before or after that? We have two requests, Mirror Inc. and the one we just talked about with Lawrence Douglas County Public Health, that are kind of unspent $25 that they're asking for in here. Do we feel the same way about that, or is that a different animal?
Yeah, fair question. I was just looking at that list again. To me, those are different requests, unused funds that we did sign inter-service agreements or contractual obligations for, that they were allocated and entered into an agreement for other circumstances meant they couldn't be spent right away, but that they can still be spent and used in the way that we intended when we signed those contracts. So I do view them differently. Thanks for that point of clarification.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to kind of find out what was in these buckets and what's not.
Sarah, that draws me. Is there any funds we think that we are contractually obligated to headquarters?
So yeah, the 2023 dollars, Bob, you want to talk about those that we didn't show on this sheet because
And it did come in the first round of headquarters budget requests. We probably, you should consider a request to reimburse them for $84,000. I think it is.
225, 255.
Yeah, from 2023.
Say that 84,000.
80,255, and it's on page 4 of their budget request from headquarters.
What we said to headquarters was that would be an item for consideration because it would be paid for with $2025 that had been reserved in the crisis line space in the budget. So there are dollars to pay that bill. The reason we didn't pay that bill before was things started to, we asked questions before we paid that bill, and from that point forward, everything kind of fell apart at headquarters. So I would want to look at the 2023 audit report.
and so we didn't list that as a supplemental request for you all because of
It's
the
just,
mess of all this, but we are holding, I mean, we have capacity inside the re-estimated 2025 budget that if we, to bring that before you to pay, because we did have a contract with them in 2023. So once we kind of, we think they're very close to completing that audit. When they finish that audit, I think we could come to you and say, we did have a contract. They've completed the audit. We think this is what we owe them. And to me, that's kind of separate from, because we did not
Separate
have a
from all of
contract.
this.
We didn't have a contract in 2024 or 5.
And that's kind of where I'm landing with it too. And I just want to clarify, the reason that that amount was invoiced but not paid was that when you start asking questions, what had been contracted for didn't actually happen. So the positions that were supposed to be contracted. So
when we asked questions about, there was funding tied to positions. We asked questions about how those dollars were paying for those positions and whether those positions were filled or vacant. And as headquarters started to drill down on finding answers to those questions, that's when they discovered just a whole lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity. So that's when we said, get back to us when you have some information, and then all these
Now
other
it's
things happened.
2025.
Yeah.
And it's very possible that 2023 audit might show that indeed they weren't following the letter of what we had in our contract with them.
I think the 2023 audit is showing that headquarters had a lot more money available to pay bills than they needed. And in all of our contracts, although I don't know that we had that clause in the 2023 agreement, it was the county should be the payer of last resort. So if you project that something is going to cost something and you spend that on staffing and all the pieces of the budget, then we'll reimburse you for that as you spend those dollars. That's not how we used to do things.
So I would say first, I don't feel badly at all that that invoice was, stopped and questioned. But I do think that with the totality of the requests that are being asked, even though that one's not written as a request, like that's the part that feels like is the easiest for us to answer to with funding.
But I would also say that we tend not to pay an agency 2 or 3 years after they don't invoice us for something.
Correct.
But they did invoice us, and that I think is pretty unique where we wouldn't get ourselves in trouble with. I mean, they invoiced us on time. We just had questions, and it was very fair, I think, to wait for answers on those.
For 3 years.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm interested to hear other commissioners' thoughts about specifically those two requests from headquarters that are in front of us, as well as the specifically the 2025 TRC funding supplemental from Bert Nash. I know I feel like I'm overlooking one, but I think it's just in a separate category as we've just sort of sussed out.
I mean, I recognize that some organizations have had a hard time meeting their financial commitments, but I think I'm not interested in, we don't have a contract with them. I'm not interested in sort of starting this down the road where organizations provide services and then come back and bill us later. That sounds like a really dangerous precedent to me.
I agree. There's a lot of work and a lot of great work that goes on in the community that the county does not pay for. And so just because things kind of fall under our priority list from an independent organization doesn't obligate us. And I think that would be a really dangerous precedent to go down. I would, just to add another thread to it, if we were to consider like one-time dollars for the SDA Care Center to help get them financial stability, I would say that that would be would put it into the realm of possibility for a discussion with headquarters, that it would be a one-time fund to help them get stability, but not at all tied to former work that was not contracted. Not saying that I'm advocating for either one of those things. I'm just kind of putting them in the same bucket and seeing if the other commissioners agree.
I am also in alignment. If we do not have a contract, I don't think that we should set a precedent and pay for those services.
Bob, was the 2024 contract signed by headquarters?
No. There was a contract that had been offered to headquarters that after things started falling apart was forwarded to us that had the former executive director's signature on it. And that's where we stopped.
Yeah, I never executed it.
Commissioner Willie, since you brought up SDA Care Center, I think that there were a couple of requests that we had that were essentially, we're worried about a gap. Their ongoing funding to make sure we can stay sustainable is sort of what I heard in that request. And, I'd love to hear the commission's thoughts on when I look at some of the organizations that we do sort of that ongoing funding, typically it's for a match. We weren't seeing I don't see the dollar amounts that some of these requests that came up this time were for. $300,000 is a significant amount of money, and typically not something that we would say. Typically, that would be a service that we would expect them to perform, not this money. What I heard was this money is going to sustain the organization over a long period of time. I'd be interested if commissioners feel like that's something that we need to do, is to back up those organizations with that kind of significant investment.
I would be just a little bit hesitant, simply because what I heard from the board at the same time was that they're also in 2 other counties, and they applied for funding from Douglas County, but they did not apply for funding from the other 2 counties that they're also in. And so that leads me to wonder why they would only come to Douglas County for funding when they're also operating and engaging in 2 other counties. And so why only come to one county and request funding and not collaborate with the other 2 counties that you're also in? So I don't think only one county should actually bear the cost for the services.
Commissioner Anderson, that's a totally a valid concern point. I'm going to offer just a little bit of context given what I know both about that organization and the organization I work for, the Willow. We have the same service areas and a lot of the same funding streams in terms of victim services dollars that get funneled down, federal and state dollars in that service area catchment. I think that what I heard yesterday is that it is a possibility that they will go and ask the counties or municipalities for dollars. What I will say is that those, and this is not something that we should bear any responsibility for. It's just, facts for context. Those other counties, in my experience, they do not prioritize funding many social services, period. And I would say, sexual assault and domestic violence dollars are even harder to come by at a local level. So Douglas County has already been sort of a unique outlier in that we have provided some overhead operational dollars that are really hard to come by for a lot of social service organizations for those 2 entities historically, even though not a lot of other counties do, even other service areas and other parts of the state. It's something that I hear from member programs that are part of the Coalition of Sexual and Domestic Violence, that local dollars are exceptionally hard to come by. So we're kind of already a little bit of an outlier in that, and that Douglas County has made a bigger commitment to, invest in the broad spectrum of social service organizations. I also heard from their organization that Douglas County dollars are not spent on expenses that are specific to the other counties in their service area. And it is also true that Douglas County population-wise is the highest volume of services for sure for both of those organizations. So there are just some other factors there. It's totally a valid point that it's not Douglas County's responsibility to, absorb all of the potential responsibility, right? And so it's valid. I hope that offers a little bit more context, and that I think we've already long ago, Douglas County has set a precedent that we're a little bit of an outlier and that we invest more significantly in the broad spectrum of social service agencies in our community than what I think other counties have committed to.
Is that even a behavioral health thing?
No, it's not eligible for behavioral health sales tax.
Oh.
It'd be general fund.
I appreciate that overview. I think it just leads me to a little hesitancy in regards to oversight for the board, that they maybe should have guided their new leader to at least look into an application to those other counties, so that when she was prepared to come to this county, she could at least say, I looked into it, they don't have opportunities for me to apply, or I went ahead and applied, but I'm probably not going to get awarded because they don't typically invest in those type of programs. So I would have just liked her to have the opportunity to really be prepared to present to this board, and for their leadership to really prepare her, right? And to set her up for success. And so I was just looking for that board to really provide that guidance to her. And that's just not what I saw.
I hear that, and I think that's valid. I think that we have a few organizations in front of us where failure of board leadership and the fiduciary responsibility that boards of directors have is manifesting in some of what we see. And so that is a difficult spot for community members, community organizations to be in, and for us as a board to wrestle with whether or not we see ourselves playing a role in that piece of it. So I think I will just acknowledge that this particular request is tough for me because it's a really critical organization in this community. But I agree with Commissioner Kelly that the amount that's being requested, specifically as a one-time infusion of cash, is significant. And I can't see that it comes with any sort of, well, there are never any true guarantees, but there's not really any assurances that it would significantly, stabilize them into the future. And to Commissioner Willie's point, we are not, the only funder of organizations for, and I know you were talking more specifically about mental health services and stuff that, but similarly, all of these social service organizations, we are not the only funder. And so for us to be a primary gap filler doesn't really make sense to me. And I think that then we do as a commission have to think about things like setting precedents and think about like equity in terms of how we are approaching decision making in the totality of the context of our budget. And so it does worry me that it sets a precedent that we are sort of a surefire place to come ask for bailout money. And I want to be good partners and figure out how we can help organizations strategize a fuller plan towards stabilization rather than dissolution. But I don't think that just money is the answer to that.
That was all my fault to bring in one that wasn't on the behavioral health. We have so many partners to talk about, and I pulled another one in, so apologize for that. But I think we've got some themes with some of those, and you said the words bailout that I wasn't going to say out loud, but I wrote it down. So we have some partners that are coming to us to solve problems that came to them that happened under leadership difficulties, and I think there'll be some philosophical thoughts around that.
I would say too, what you don't have on this sheet related to behavioral health is, I'm meeting weekly with Dr. Watkins at Burt Nash regarding, their financial situation. And, I think it's highly likely that they're going to request funds from us in addition to what you have in the budget submittal for transition-related costs to this transition. They've contracted with SS&C to help with their financials. I don't know that they have a mechanism right now to pay for that. Eventually, they will need a search firm to search for a new executive director. All of these are in top of, so I would just say, I think you're going to get asked again for funds for Burt Nash on top of what you have here. And there was no way I could put a dollar amount on that for this process at this hour. But I just think you should also bear that in mind.
Hey, could we move back to headquarters for a minute? I wanted to ask about that local phone line, the 841-2345. Is that a county-owned telephone line or what's?
So that is the same line that headquarters has been using for 40 years and the same phone number that headquarters has been using for 40 years. They've continued to staff and answer that line even as 988 has come online. So that number can go away and all of the calls would be fielded by headquarters when people dialed 988.
But the county has nothing to do with that phone number.
County has nothing to do with that phone number. And in fact, when things were delicate last year, we had Nash and Douglas County had conversation with headquarters about if we needed to locally now take responsibility for if headquarters was to go away, well, could we acquire that line? And the answer was no. So it's all their operation.
And when did Douglas County begin being a funding partner? Because we have not been for the largest portion of their time.
No, we started when they proposed leading the bringing the Zero Suicide Academy to Douglas County. So I think our first allocation in 2019 was $75,000, $50,000 for the academy and $25,000 for suicide prevention work.
And then they were charged with dispatching mobile response for a period of time. So then
That's
they
very
didn't-
important here.
the
That
funds
changed.
were added. So it's important to note that previous allocation of 350,000 was built off two lines of service. One, just not ever coming back to them. It's going to stay at ECC.
And it was
So-
never 350.
Yeah.
It was like 326.
Yeah, it was 326. It was an odd number. And so I would say regarding headquarters, if the commission feels that county support of that local crisis line is important for the future, we should have a start from scratch conversation with headquarters about what is that cost and what is that obligation for us in that situation without them doing mobile response. So, I mean, I don't think 350 is a number that's based off any sort of actual expense criterion that is valid today.
I'm just wondering if that line were to suddenly disappear, what it would do for people seeking help.
They would dial 988 and headquarters would answer the phone. You know, what the data shows is that people in Douglas County are very used to and have a lot of trust and confidence in dialing that local 9 number, so they would get a local person answering the phone. But over the last year, the phone carriers, with a couple of exceptions now, are all geolocated. So if a person with a Texas area code standing in Douglas County dials the phone, headquarters answers it.
Well, I know from personal experience, I dialed 988 a few years ago and I got somebody in New Jersey because I have a New Jersey area code.
Right. But that's not true anymore.
So those two programs that had been associated with headquarters briefly are no longer, neither one of them. Either the Zero Suicide Coordinator position, which is with Lawrence Douglas County Public Health, or with dispatching the mobile response team, which is with our emergency communications. However, within that time frame, we've also been standing up an entire crisis response system and the 988, at least, which is the state funded, so it may not need anything from us, but that is an important and crucial first point of contact for our whole behavioral health system. So does that then say that there's a portion of that would be uniquely Douglas County interested in that service above and beyond 988, or does 988 then really serve any piece we would need to? It's just that we have the rest of the system that wraps around it.
And I guess I just say, commissioners, for sake of you all trying to figure out where to go from here, that is a conversation we can have outside of budget for the future. I don't think we're going to negotiate that, figure out what's best at this table over the next 3 or 4 days on that issue. To me, the question is do you want to have some sort of obligation for what happened in 24 and 25? If, my recommendation would be, if you want to support them ongoing for the future, that we start from scratch with a whole new agreement.
Sir, You mentioned Bert Nash in that there may be a request coming to us for some uh, support in this transition. That doesn't sound like capital to me, but it does sound like one-time funds. So do you have a dollar recommendation for us to set aside for that? I mean, like, it seems like you're making the argument that we do need a one-time fund thing that isn't capital. And I think we need to think about if we're going to set that up, what's the percentage of our mental health sales tax that would go to that fund? And whether that's an annual basis or not.
I do think we are sort of in extraordinary times here
Sure.
with some of these requests, and I want to hope that they won't repeat themselves in the future, fingers and toes crossed. But I would say that, you also have to remember that even if we moved everything out but the 25% fund balance, that's a couple million. So you'd have capacity inside that. So I would say, I feel like I confused you all by trying to really talk about like moving that money out to a separate fund. We can get through this year's budget, figure out what you want to pay for, and then like we can have that conversation later about how that capital fund comes in, or you can just exempt it from our fund balance policy and then this isn't an issue. So I don't want you to I think you guys have other policy issues, related to how you want to fund these one-time dollars. And I think that's probably your best bet of focus right now, not like whether it sits in CIP or not. Just, I think you guys need to determine, and I think they're all different. So while I appreciate that you're trying to sort of say, how do we want to treat them? STA is different from headquarters, which is different from Bert Nash. It's different from the public health, zero suicide. It's different from the permanent supportive housing. I'd say like if you weren't interested in doing the permanent supportive housing project, you're not going to fund it one time. So like to me, it's tied somewhat to that request, for example.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm looking at the clock, commissioners, and I want to resist it. My experience, we've never sort of done it this way. Started deliberations with this kind of conversation.
Right.
It was a bit of an experiment and something that I think has been helpful, but I also want to resist the urge for going down into specific funding requests. I was thinking, I think we talked about sort of a broad picture of some of these that are falling into categories. So I want to be careful of our time and make sure we need time with our worksheets to really and see where that falls out. I'm just interested if commissioners have still broader things they want to talk about, or do we feel like we're starting to wind down into it's time to start working on worksheets and see where that comes out.
Well, I have a question. I'm curious as to why that request would come to us, like either during budget, after budget, and why it would not come to their board for it to actually be paid out of their endowment.
It might go to that first. Yeah, it might. I'm not saying it wouldn't. I don't know yet. I'm just telling you that, in this transition, they've asked for 500,000 for current for 25 and we just don't know. I mean, they're really just still looking at their financials to have a sense of what it would be. My assumption is anything that would come to us would come to us at the request of their boards ask.
I would express a general grumpiness for being requested for something of a gap funding for 2025 when we met the obligation sent to us at budget time for the 2025 budget. That's not to take off the table that we would be helping with something, but I'm just expressing my grumpiness that is not our fault in any way, shape, or form. I mean, that is a significant defect in the organization to come back and say we have this gap when we told you we wouldn't.
And while, I love being grumpy about people asking us for money, I completely agree. However, I would say that if the county has an interest in, a full financial audit, we may have to pay for it.
I would say that the board has a fiduciary duty to pay for their own audit. And up to this point, I feel like there has been a lack of governance.
We actually pay for their audit. Yeah.
Well, in this case, they have a lack of governance. And this time around, I think they should pay for their own audit. And next time around, I think Dr. Watkins should come with her board and not alone.
My only comment is, out of our discussion, we've determined a lot of things that we should talk about over the next year that we shouldn't wait till budget time to talk about.
Yeah, and that's what's actually really helpful about this process is I use these conversations to really build our work plan for the second half of the year. So, that's what we're making notes about. And I'd like us to kind of fall back on that when you wrap this process up. What things did you want to talk more about? So we definitely can do that. And so as you're going through your worksheet, if you're like, yeah, I really do want to talk more about, obviously like truancy, for example, is another conversation that we got a lot of information about. That to me is something that regardless of what happens with the funding for CSC, I need to bring back to you additional information this fall related to truancy. So you're absolutely on the right track. The only other thing I would add here, because I think you're right, I think, we're going down the conversation about specific items. We have a lot of material to cover, folks, next week. So please, if you have questions over the weekend in terms of when you're looking at your spreadsheets and your worksheets, please, Brooke and I will be monitoring our emails and texts. Let us know so that we can try to get many answers for you as possible before Monday. We've been getting in some additional information just while I've been sitting here. We got information from district court on eviction resolution coordinator. So that folder where Jake has been putting your updates, keep checking that through like 5 o'clock today is probably when you'll get your last update in there, because you might have a piece of information you're looking for in there. And if you have problems accessing that, let us know. But I think unless there are other questions, I think
I would say one more thing, if that's okay,
Yeah.
related to the budget. When we take a look at mental health, and possibly like standing up an organization to fill the gap during Burt Nash and some of the challenges that they're having, I am interested in taking a look at Heartland Community Health Center and funding them at the level of 1.5 for their loan, and then requesting that they take a look at, I think the suggestion that the CEO made was 2 case managers. I mean, we'll have to go back and look at the notes. 2 case managers for 2 years, but I don't want to take a look at 2 years. I think it should just be for 1 year, taking a look at what that would look like for 1 year, what we would get for that 1.5 million, the capacity that we could build in for 1 year, what we would actually get for 1 year for the services that would actually be rendered, and the programming that would actually fill that gap as Burt Nash is getting up to speed, finishing their audit, and figuring out what they actually need to do to build their capacity back.
So this
And
is
so,
a good example of something that you'll just put on your worksheet.
okay, I can
And-
do that. I just want the
Yeah,
other
'cause-
commissioners to know what I'm thinking through in my head.
Yeah, but that's part of my concern. If there's not 2 votes to talk about that, I'm trying to
Okay.
keep us narrowed. So like that's an example to me of, you'll note that on your worksheet, and then we'll bring to you on Monday a list of items that have more than one commissioner or at least 2 commissioners interested in talking about it. Does that make sense?
I'll want to talk about it, so I think we'll have at least 2.
Yeah, that's great.
But I want a lot for my 1.5 for a lot of years, so,
Okay, well, yeah, and I only want it
Manage
for 1
expectations.
year because my assumption is the next year, they would probably come back with another ask. So I don't want 2 years out of it. So, and that was the suggestion. So I know that majority of community partners will always come back the following year with another ask for dollars. So I would not want there to be 2 years on the table.
And I would never entertain a second $1.5 million, so. I shouldn't say never, but that's.
Well,
I think the
when we
question-
look at the amount of dollars that Burt Nash is actually asking for and what they received the year prior, 2 million that we didn't actually get a building for, I don't think 1.5 is actually out of the question.
Okay. Commissioner Dorsey, did you say you had something?
Well, I just had a question about next week.
Yep.
When we go through the actual deliberations, you're going to compile a list of 2+ that people want to talk about. Then we'll discuss those issues individually, or at least 2 want to talk about it. And then what happens?
Well, so what we will do is, if you'll talk about an item, if there's consensus amongst this group, we will add it to that results column on that spreadsheet. And each day, as you kind of make consensus decisions, we'll show you what results you've made to that point. And then we'll just keep going until the list is done. And then and by that point, you'll have a sense of, where your proposed budget is, or where your final recommended budget is. Does that make sense?
So after the conclusion of all the discussions,
You'll get
we
an
may look at our sheet and it may say 43 mills, or
Yeah.
it may say 39 mills.
Right, or it could say 46 mils, right? And then you're like, eek, I don't want to do that. So then what? So that's how it'll go. So we'll show you what its impact will be on the levy there. And so I probably will not throw that spreadsheet up until much later in the process. We'll just be using it to track consensus. And then we'll update it and show you where you're at.
Would the plan be to do the big dollar items first or at the end? I'm thinking
Actually-
more of LD.
My hope was to sort it with the items we're going to start with the items that there's the most consensus on. So let's say if there's something all 5 of you love, which I'm betting there isn't. But let's say there was one that you all 5 were in agreement on. We'll start with that one because that should be the easiest, right? And then we'll move through from that method and get down towards the end. Because I think then what you'll see then is at a certain point, if there's only 1 or 2 people, you got to convince, and you've already made a lot of decisions. So this will help you my hope is this helps you build consensus.
And usually the chair runs that process for
So,
what comes next.
Yeah. So what I would encourage you is, you need to keep your copy of what you submit with you. So because if you say, well, I want to give him $40,000 and Erica says I want to give him $20,000, I'm not going to put that on the sheet. I'm just going to say we're talking about this so that you know where it is. And so like in the example that we were talking about, if Karen wants an obligation for 20 years because that's the life of their debt and that we're helping to pay off, then, she's going to talk about what does she anticipate out of that for the life of the debt that they're paying off. Does that make sense? So that's why it'd be really great. We really need this from you guys by no later than Sunday at 5. If you can get it to us earlier, that would be great. And then what Brooke's going to do is we're just going to, as I told her, it will be a PDF document that'll have a list, and it will just start with supplementals or items that if there are more than, the most consensus items, and we'll just go down the list and tackle it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're going to stay up all night.
Oh, you know her. She's so fat. She'll get up at 4 a.m, knowing Brooke, and she'll get up at 4 a.m. and do it. So, because she's a morning person.
Oh,
And-
one
go ahead.
note for Jake, I can't open Excel through our county laptop, but anything you can put in a PDF, I can get. It's great.
Yeah, so that it's your worksheet, but you can open your worksheet through
I'm good with
OneDrive.
that. It was in that supplemental folder of
Okay,
information.
move it all to
Yeah,
PDF.
it's got it.
Yeah.
And is there anything known about the SS&C contract amount for Bert Nash?
I don't have any
think-
information at this point.
If it could become by, I think that'd be good, but it's not.
I don't think I'll have it.
Have it, and we weren't given it, so.
Since you brought that up again, Commissioner Willie, I do think that that's just a separate and post-budget conversation at this point. And to Commissioner Kelly, I might have misconstrued what you said earlier, but sort of the idea that we might think about a set-aside amount for Bert Nash that was not necessarily tied to the requests we have in front of us, but for
Not necessarily for
okay.
Bert Nash, but I just want us to think about it. If we're not going to move and I heard what Sarah said, if we're not going to create a capital fund, then it doesn't matter. But if we are going to create it, I'd like us to sort of think about, just like for all capital projects, how do we put money aside for capital projects, not just let's hope there's some left over and we'll put some in. Do we want to do the same thing for some type of account for one-time non-capital? So I do think we got a little in the weeds there. Well, we are in the weeds, but I appreciate what Sarah said. Like maybe we don't need to figure that out today or even this week, but down the road.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the clarity.
I've got one last question there was something about the cells not being locked the other day.
We got it done. They're locked.
They're locked.
They're locked
Okay,
now.
and do you have to send it out again or it's just,
Nope, it's just on the drive. It's all up.
even if I'm at home?
Yep.
Okay.
Automatically. Thanks, Darla and Soji.
All right. Anything else, commissioners? Thank you for your work today. I appreciate these discussions. Thank you, staff. Everybody, I know you're going to work hard over the weekend, but give yourself some time as well because we have a long week ahead of us. So we are adjourned.